eye-opening platform where I have learned a lot, and a lot of people that I've engaged with have learned a lot from each other. As the moderator, as the chairperson has already given me the mic to start this panel discussion, I would like to head straight into our first panel discussion and make it as quick as possible so that we can answer certain questions and also be able to have questions coming from the colleagues, and then also maybe move into the next session so that we can answer as many questions as possible. So how we're going to do this is, firstly, as the other members of the panel are answering questions, I'd also like them to take a brief moment to also introduce themselves and also maybe introduce some of the work that they're doing or the spaces that they work in, so that we understand the context in which they come from, and we also can appreciate the contributions on the panel based on their lived experiences, the contribution to the space, and also the role that they might play moving forward in the future. So, starting first things first, my question to the panel would be, the first panel would be, in terms of creation of green jobs in Southern Africa and in Africa in general, what are the realistic opportunities within the area, within the region? Secondly, a more detailed conversation on what green jobs look like and what green jobs would look like for Africa, and what green jobs would look like for Namibia, and what green jobs would look like for the region in general. So I don't know who might want to take that question on, but also a brief introduction of themselves and the work that they do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon. I think to colleagues, I'm Faisal Aburema. I'm from Niger. I'm also based in Madagascar at the ILO office, but I come here on the request of our office in Zimbabwe. Oh, wow. Yeah, so that's why there is this confusion, but I'm based in the ILO County office in Madagascar, covering Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Comoros, but I'm also member of the ILO Decent Work Team, which is covering Southern and Eastern Africa, and that's why I'm here, because we are also covering Southern Africa. So I'm working at ILO as a blue economy and a green job specialist. Maybe just to give a quick idea, both in terms of blue economy and green job, we work, let's say, at three levels. The first level is really at a macro level in terms of how to design a job-rich and inclusive blue economy and green economy policy. And for that, you need to really make the sound research to be able to have this kind of sound policy. And then at a meso level, we need really, it's not only about defining the policy, but also you have to ensure that the technical services, they have the capacity in terms of training, in terms of knowledge, to operationalize this policy, but also we intervene directly on the field to implement, let's say, some specific blue economy, green jobs activities in the ground, directly in collaboration with our constituents. And now to come to your question about what green job is, let's say we don't have a universal definition of green jobs. You can have like the World Bank definition, a UN definition, an OECD definition. So I will give the ILO definition of green jobs, which is a working definition or a statistical definition. So for ILO, a green job is first a decent job. So I will insist on that. It's first a decent job, then which could contribute to preserve the environment, which could contribute to the ecosystem quality. So the fact to work for me in the green hydrogen, for example, sector will not be enough to say that I have a green job. So your first, for your jobs to be green, it first to be decent in terms of fair income, in terms of really all the kind of right health and safety, the right to have a social protection of. So the job first need to be decent. So after that, your job could be green either by the output or either by the process. So green by the output, it means that I'm just using conventional working technologies or techniques, but the final outputs would be a green product like the green hydrogen or a solar panel. Or the jobs could be also green by the process, which means that I'm using technologies and techniques and processes which are using less energy, less resources, generating less waste. So then here my job is green by the process. So this is, let's say, the statistical definition of green job according to ILO. Thank you.
Right. But then there was also a second aspect of that question that I had asked about exactly what are the realistic job opportunities in green job opportunities from hydrogen, green hydrogen production within the area?
Great. I think we have to know that in green hydrogen and let's say in renewable energy in general, jobs will not be created by default. It needs to be intentional. For example, I could invest a lot of money in green hydrogen or another renewable energy if I did not design my investment to be a job-rich initiative, then it will not necessarily create jobs. And I think we are experiencing that in several African countries where you have growth, you have economic growth, but you don't have a job creation. Sometimes you can have economic growth, but if you could see the employment rate is either stagnating or sometimes even decreasing. So the job creation needs to be intentional. So this is the first thing. So, and how we could do that? So within ILO we have a green job creation cycle, which will first start by sound research. We really need we have some, let's say, dedicated tools and methodology, and one of them is the green job assessment methodology. You can access on internet if you just put GJAM, green job assessment methodology. It is a methodology developed by ILO and a network of institutions which are specialized in green job assessment. The name is GAIN, which means Green Job Assessment Institutions Network. So this methodology, it is using, let's say, it's a country macro level modeling techniques using input-output table and social accounting matrix at country level. And it is a tool which could help you to do a modeling. For example, I would like to do something in the green hydrogen. The first thing is really to define some scenarios, because you don't have only one way to produce green hydrogen. You have different itineraries. Some of them may be job rich, some of them may be just cost effective, some of them will be eco-friendly. So you need to define different scenarios and use this modeling approach and in a, let's say, a what-if approach to see, okay, for each of those scenarios, which one will be the most interesting in terms of job creation, in terms of gender equality, in terms of skills, in terms of income distribution, in terms of contribution to GDP, and so on. So you really need to do this sound research to identify where are the opportunities, where are the challenges, because by doing such an investment, you could create jobs, but don't forget also that you could destroy jobs, because you have, for example, persons who are working in the fossil fuel sectors who have only skills for fossil fuel, and now you would like to do this shift from fossil to sustainable. Do they have the required skills? Not necessarily. So you need to have the assessment to produce the detailed picture, to know exactly in which scenario I could really create a maximum of job. And even if I would create a maximum of job, you have to know also which are the jobs which may be displaced or destroyed, or which will need to be redefined. And then based on that, you will need also because if you do the assessment, this is just theoretical number of jobs that could be created. But to do that, you will also need the required skills to do that. So based on the result of your analysis, you also need to do your skills need assessment to see what are the required initiatives in terms of reskilling, in terms of upskilling, and to really develop a national skills roadmap for this specific sector to be able to provide the workers and future workers with the required skills to make this theoretical number of jobs to become a reality. So we need all those things to be done, and it's this kind of the result of this kind of research that you could design a job-rich policy which should be done for social dialogue to ensure that both civil societies, workers, the private sectors, and the government are really involved to build a strong consensus on because to do a transition you need such a consensus. Otherwise you will have some resistance, people will, so you and to build this consensus and to have an efficient dialogue, you need to produce those research to have really an efficient dialogue, because a dialogue without the data, without the knowledge, it can become just a fight instead of being a dialogue. But when everyone knows where are the opportunities, where are the challenges, thanks to a sound research, it will be possible to build such a consensus towards those green job creation. And to make this happen within ILO, we have the so-called the Just Transition Guidelines. So in these guidelines, who can guide you? Okay, once you have the research, you identify the opportunities and the challenges, this is what you need to do in terms of skills development. This is what you need to do in terms of social protection. Why social protection? Because by doing such a transition toward a new sector, some of people might be negatively impacted by the initiative. And so you need to design dedicated social protection schemes to protect either an income loss or job loss for those persons, because for us the principle of no one left behind is something very important for us. So you need a social dialogue, a systematic one. For that also we have a full mechanism of social dialogue. I will not detail it here, but it's really something which is systematic with specialists, which needs to be institutionalized. So it's not only ad hoc or so. You really need to go for those just transition measures. Once you have the research, you have the policy, you have the strategy, but you still need those measures to make the job creation become effective. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Very, very, very detailed. And I see some people are actually ready to clap, and some people might have
in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Can I add on to that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more with my colleague Faisal on the need for solid research.
Wait, sorry to interrupt. Also, please introduce yourself and where you're coming from.
I was about to. It was a little. as Claudia has explained, my name is Deborah Wolf, and I work for a research institute. Hence my firm agreements on the need for robust research. We're based in Cape Town. We deal with a range of sort of natural resource governance issues, including energy transitions and green hydrogen. And we've just concluded a year-and-a-half-long project on employment impacts through the green hydrogen economy, focused on South Africa, in particular. And we looked specifically to skills and how we can sort of reposition the public TVET, technical vocational educational training system, in South Africa to cater to the emerging needs of the green hydrogen economy in South Africa. And so I know Faisal's mentioned scenario planning or working with forecasting and scenarios. So as a part of our project, we undertook pretty extensive quantitative forecasting to think about sort of different economic and employment impacts of the emerging green hydrogen economy in South Africa. And so that forecasting grappled with a range of different assumptions and variables. We're trying to answer the question that you posed in the very beginning. What's realistic job-wise, and how do we sort of effect that change, effect those desirable outcomes? And so some of the variables and assumptions that we dealt with, looked at different levels of the domestic utilization of hydrogen. South Africa is also known for having, the largest reserves of platinum group metals, which is a group of metals which are critical for producing and scaling renewable energy technologies globally. And so it's a real competitive advantage that South Africa has, abundant reserves of PGMs, and it also opens up very many doors in terms of beneficiation along the green hydrogen value chain, in terms of producing electrolyzers, catalyzers, hydrogen fuel cells, and for the electric vehicle industry as well. And so the results of our project, I have to be very strategic with my wording because it's still to launch in December, but the outcome was the development of 4 different scenarios that grappled with these different assumptions that I've just mentioned, relating to manufacturing, export, and then domestic utilization. And sort of our big outcome, there were many, but I suppose the most significant is that we need a very diversified green hydrogen economy. We need to focus on both domestic utilization, export, and beneficiation, really developing local value chains, using green hydrogen. So I think that's a bit of a detour, but hopefully that kind of answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, it does. But I think also your answer brings into question a few questions that were asked yesterday, and also I think what is a very critical part of what this discussion is meant to be, which would be in the realm of how do we ensure that local communities are also included in terms of employment, how do we protect local communities or communities that are not necessarily as mainstream in terms of employment, to make sure that they also benefit from a green economy, from a hydrogen project in Namibia, in South Africa, and different countries that might want to have such projects at such a scale.
Sure. So I know that Faisal's mentioned the need to be inclusive, and the need to be sort of just, to push forward a just transition. And so this is where our focus on TVET, was critical in the project. So the TVET system in South Africa has, long been struggling, facing a range of financial issues. I think a big image with public image as well. And when we look at the forecasted skills that are needed for the emerging green hydrogen economy in South Africa, when we think about skills categories, so low skilled, medium skilled, and high skilled, we're anticipating the most significant job creation potential within that medium skill band. And the majority of TVET qualifications, about 55% of TVET qualifications in South Africa, fall within this medium skill category. Another 36% are categorized as high skilled, and then the remainder as low skilled. So TVET is really, very best placed to meet the needs for the emerging green hydrogen economy and emerging green economies more broadly. And so that's where the sort of the focus on social inclusivity comes through with the focus on TVET. Yeah. And there's a strong gender dimension that I could speak to as well. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Biekus. I am from Hyper Hydrogen Energy. I am very much Namibian. My background is in law. I spent the last 12 years outside the country working predominantly in South Africa on renewable energy projects. So under the renewable energy programs, so specifically on wind projects. I have some experience in, just to your very last question, how do local communities get involved? In the South African design of their program, they've gone to a lot of granularity in terms of making sure that different parts of the community participate. And so you have a job creation element or obligation, and then that is kind of categorized right down to local community, and that would initially it was defined within like a 50-kilometer radius of where your power plant would be located. And then nationally. I was also wanting maybe just to bring the conversation back to perhaps more tangible, practical example. I think the Hyper project is the first real project of the size of this nature. And so how we have approached it, and I think when we talk about that level of granularity, we're not there yet. I think it's important to understand where we are in the process generally as Hyper vis-a-vis government. But also just as to the policy position, because you need to take certain policy stances when you talk about employment and how you involve local communities or not. The Namibian policy from a constitutional perspective is very much one Namibia, one nation. And so there is no differentiation in when we do employment, how we do it. What the Namibian government has done is they've said, well, in your tender response to us tell us how many jobs we will create during your construction phase, how many jobs we will create during the operations phase, and how many of those jobs would be taken up by Namibians. And so, to tell you, so where we are with government is, we are only the first preferred bidder in a tender that was launched by government. That means we have to go through a process to realize an actual mandate, a license to operate. And so we're busy with negotiations with government to achieve that. In those negotiations, and you know, the detail that was provided by a colleague, the earlier speaker, is fantastic because it provides the framework of how one should go about doing this. In the Hyphen case, you have a couple of weeks, you know, as a project developer to say, well, okay, we're interested in this project. How do you design it? How do you look at it? What are the potential jobs that could emerge from a project like that? What we did, and if you, I'm sure a lot of the group here, you've seen the high-level project design, which is various infrastructure development components. So you have desalination, you have mega wind and solar installation, then you have a pipeline of water that goes to an electrolysis facility, a pipeline that takes your hydrogen from your electrolysis facility to an ammonia facility, and then it's exported. And so here, going back to the distinctions made by my colleague earlier on which phase in the hydrogen value chain are we talking about, it's predominantly upstream. So upstream is really your generation of your power, the generation of your ammonia. We're not talking midstream and downstream yet. Midstream, you know, really talks to transportation. There's elements of that when you talk about pipeline, and we certainly don't have a downstream sector yet, which is really where you start taking your ammonia and you're producing fertilizer. So when we talk about job creation from a Hyphen perspective, it is keeping in mind that we're talking about upstream, because this is an export project. It is the first project in the Namibian government's very ambitious ambitions to create a green hydrogen industry in Namibia. And so we went at the start of the project and we said, well, we need to do an analysis of, for each of those infrastructure components, how many jobs using industry metrics, because at that stage, when you're responding to a tender, you have a couple of weeks to come up with those numbers. And so you use industry metrics, for instance, and you say, well, for every, if I assume I'm going to be implementing 5 to 6 gigawatt of wind and solar power, typically, and 60% of that will be wind power, what does the industry say about how many wind turbine service technicians do I need to maintain that power plant during my maintenance phase, or my maintenance and operations phase? And so we've gone through that process. Where we are now, once we've signed the agreement with government, we go into a detailed analysis where we say for each of those, what is the exact number, what is the exact type of job, what is the skill and competency level required, what is the timing during your construction phase where you need to place that job. And that, of course, informs your training approach and your strategy. Alongside that, of course, we need to do massive baseline studies. What is available in Namibia? Does it speak to the type of jobs that we're looking for? We'll have to have multiple interventions. It is long-term, you know, kind of short-type projects, etc., or training courses. So it's really a multiplicity of interventions that will be required to place the percentage of Namibians that we expect to place. To give you the numbers, 15,000 is the number that we expect to employ during construction phase. That's over a 4-year period. We have we have proposed, our proposal is that we want to employ at least up to 90% of that to be Namibians. That is a tall order considering the specialization that would be required, the level of experience that would typically be needed for projects of this size and nature. But that is our intent. Similarly, for the operations phase, we've said at full scale, that's 300,000 tons of ammonia per year, between 5 and 6 gigawatt of wind and solar. We're looking at 3,000 employees, and again, aiming for a 90% target. Also, just one, I know I'm talking a lot now, but TVET, critically important when we talk about those wind and solar technicians. We estimate at this stage, based on current project configuration, we would need anything between 500 and 600 wind turbines. So you could look at anything between 300 and 500 wind turbine service technicians to service that industry. And going back to the definition of what is a green job, decent salary, high level, and I'm oversimplifying it, but also is the output green? And if the output is green ammonia, then you're looking at least, on average, that number of service technicians that have to be trained in Namibia just for this project. So massive opportunity from a TVEC perspective. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I think Feko wanted to also add something to what you said, but in the meantime, before he does, if you do have any questions concerning the conversation so far, please do phrase it properly and make it very concise and precise so that we can take it down, and then at the end of the session, we can have this panel answer a lot of questions that I assume might be coming from you colleagues.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to build on this question related to how to create jobs for local communities, but also how to improve the engagement in the process. There too, the research and the policy could really help and guide, because the first thing with the research, instead of just saying that this is what we are going to do, you can really build different scenarios of, let's say, of different value chain or sub-value chain. And thanks to the research, especially the tool I was talking about, for example, you can be able to see the number of jobs that you could create in urban area and rural area. The number and the type of jobs that you could create for low-skilled people and high-skilled people. The number and type of jobs that could be created for, let's say, youth, or maybe the ones between, let's say, 18 and 24, and the person who are, let's say, more experienced than that. So, thanks to this kind of research, you could really target your intervention to say, okay, if I would like the majority of jobs to be created, for example, in rural area, because we shouldn't forget that even if we are in the hydrogen value chain, you could create direct jobs in the hydrogen value chain, but you could also create indirect jobs in all the other value chains who are supplying services and goods to the hydrogen value chain. And you could also have induced jobs. What are these induced jobs? It's like, if you create direct job and indirect job in the hydrogen value chain and the other value chain, those persons who are now are earning money, they will use this money to buy food for housing, and this will also create other jobs. So thanks to this tool, you could see where are the direct jobs, where are the indirect jobs, where are the induced jobs, and which jobs are in the rural area, which jobs are in the urban area, which jobs are for low skill, high skill. So with this kind of data, you could really design your intervention to ensure that this target group, for example, local communities, would be the ones who will really benefit with this specific intervention in the green hydrogen value chain. And then once you have this data, then of course, and then when you know the exact number that you would like, a job of that you would like to create, and the profile of this job, these jobs, then based on that, you can do your skills need assessment now to say, okay, these are the job profile, so these are the specific need of type of skills that we need to create. What is the current situation in this area in terms of capacity to provide this job, in terms of TVET, in terms of, and then once you know your gap, then based on that you can really design your sound interventions to give those skills. But even if you train them, this will not be enough, because you will need after training follow-up to ensure that you have this follow-up, that you need to develop the just transition measure, the incentives to ensure that the industry, they will hire those persons who have been trained, because they will just not train them because they are nice person. No, they need incentives, they need some reason, but also they need some interest to do that. So you need to go through all these cycles from the research till the after training interventions to ensure that you are not just doing some theoretical things, assessment, but which will not happen in the reality. And to do all these things, you need this social dialogue at all those levels also, the national, regional, and also the local level, because you could do all these assessments to identify what is needed, of course, but these local communities, is it really what they need? Are they willing to do that? So if they are not also involved in all those research, in all dialogue, in all those process, maybe you will design a very nice thing on the paper, but which would not happen in the reality because the targeted group, they were not involved for a systematic dialogue. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. So I think what we can do is take a couple of questions that we will note down and then answer at the end of the panel session when we're having a Q&A. I saw a hand, I saw another hand. I'll take 5. So another hand, one more. I'll take another one. So I'll start with yes.
In a finite time, we will get there. So my name is Desmond van Oogsten, and I have a question to Tony specifically, and it is not supposed to be critical of the hydrogen energy initiative at all, but it is just a genuine question in terms of the ambitious goal of actually having 90% of the construction workforce sourced from Namibia. The evidence that we have for multi-billion-dollar projects from Namibia, like in the uranium mining industry, for example, but also the gold mining industry in Namibia and gold mining in other parts of Africa, certainly do not support these type of figures. So that is part one. So I'm just curious whether this can be underpinned by any serious fact, or is just wishful thinking, and this is not meant to be critical of hydrogen. I'll just say that again. And my other question again is of course in terms of the classification of green jobs. I just want to ask the general question, and there's no agenda behind it. I just want us to reflect on this. So if I want to create green jobs, and in the process of doing so, I reduce the ecosystem services through the processes that I use by reducing environmental biodiversity, by having discharges into the ocean, very substantial discharges in terms of desalination, and by producing green ammonia, which is a toxin, which is a marine toxin, and it is a toxic substance, highly toxic substance. Are we actually, when we are talking about green ammonia, still talking about green jobs? Thank you. And this is not anti-hyphen. 3 times, like they say in marketing. Say it once, say it twice, 3 times. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question.
There were 2.
Yes, for those questions.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good afternoon. So, my name is Jemima Beatrice from Namibian Sun newspaper. My question also goes to Tony. When you talk about the 10%, when you talk about the 50,000 jobs, saying 90% of this should ideally be Namibians, that leaves us with the remaining 10%. Does it mean the remaining 10% will be the high-skilled personnel? And if so, I would like to just share with you information from the Engineering Council of Namibia, and that is that we have 3,000 registered engineers locally who are well capable to take up these senior positions. And they also feel that splitting water into hydrogen is like daily bread for an engineer, and they feel that any person who deems themselves a competent engineer should be able to work with hydrogen, and that it is not it's not so complex at the end of the day. Even if there are new technologies, it would take them no longer than 6 months to learn these new skills. So could you share with me how far is Hyphen with the targeted training program that you are planning with government, and how many people have gone already, if they have gone? And then I would also like to find out, when you say, when it comes to creating employment, Namibia's position is one Namibia, one nation, does this mean that people residing in the Karas region will not necessarily be given preferential treatment in terms of access to these jobs and opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. I love the panel that I'm on because I am very confident that we will get answers before the end of the day. Third question.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gabriel Dresdenji. I'm with the ACF, focusing on JETP, as well as green hydrogen and electric vehicles. My question today is just, it's coming more from my personal background as a chemical engineer. I wanted to know that, look, from a youth perspective, entering the green energy space is quite difficult, mainly because you need high levels of expertise or high levels of experience. And in many cases, a lot of these very specialized roles are filled with, if you're in a developing economy, it's filled with foreigners or with people from typically Europe or China or the US. So my question is just, in what way is Hyphen looking at providing opportunities for the Namibian youth, academic, and other interested parties who want to participate in the green economy? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Moving on to question number 4. Note a hand somewhere at the back. I don't know if that question is still up for discussion.
All right, thank you. My name is Vazana Manyame and I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm a sustainable consultant and I work with the EnviroSmart Consultancy, the Business Council for Sustainable Development Zimbabwe, and I'm also an environmental correspondent with the Green Business Seed. So my question, I'm not sure who's going to take on this question, and I also think that it will also go on to the next session on civil society engagement. So I'm asking if there's any policy or any systems that are being put in place to ensure that the green hydrogen remains green, looking at the explanation of green jobs that we've gotten, so that the whole hydrogen value chain remains sustainable, considering that we might have an increase in the need for catalysts and everything, and also have to increase demand in the need for iridium and platinum, looking at the mines coming on to labor, the issues of cheap labor and the rush to meet demand. So are there any policies or systems? I think this will go on to issues of environmental and social governance, and yeah, it's a whole lot of things that I think you can be where I'm trying to direct the question to. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Watsanai. One last question from the back. I think the gentleman in grey. Oh, okay. So if there's anyone who wants to add one question, cool.
Hi, my name is Bridget. I'm an independent consultant specializing in gender, and I'm also the national coordinator at Sister Namibia, so wearing 2 hats today, but civil society. I just have a question around, it's also similar around policies and systems in place, especially on a sort of a regional or global pressure around really considering gender constraints and barriers when looking at these new initiatives coming into place. I know that we've made, one can say, we've been a bit blind in past with other industries, considering migrant labours, shift work, vulnerable children travelling. I can imagine all of these will be issues that will be coming with the green hydrogen energy, and I'm just wondering where those pressures will come from. Will it come from government, from companies like Hyphen to be responsible, sort of gold standard companies? Where will those pressures be coming from? Will we be relying on our government, or is there somewhere else that would be putting pressure on this emerging economy? Thank you.
All right, I missed your name, sorry, please say
Bridget Lutz.
Bridget, right. Thank you. It is at this juncture that I'll thank you guys for your questions, and also thank the initial panel discussion for their contributions and also their time and effort. and also their experiences shared today. If you can help me by thanking these panelists by giving them a round of applause. Thank you very much. With the powers vested in me, I would like pronounce him husband and wife. I would like to hand over to my colleague, Iskia.
Absolutely correct. Thank you so much, Dino. Can I just seek as to whether Dr. Amin is with us virtually?
Yes.
He is now. Thank you so much once again. My name is Iskia. I represent the untapped Region Civil Society Organizations Network right here in Namibia. Our session will be focusing on the critical role of civil society engagement, of course, in relation to renewable energy projects that is all across Africa. Now, of course, we know CSO, civil society organizations, play such an important role in terms of representing the interests and the needs of people when it comes to developmental issues, be it at local authority, government level, and so forth. Now, starting off with Anthony, the first question is actually directed to you. Now, many times civil society organizations are consulted only at the initial stages of capital projects or energy projects. But then why do you think it's important to have civil society organizations as part of being in steering committees or governing committees regarding renewable energy projects? Just briefly.
All right. Thank you so much, Oskia. My name is Anthony Mazula. I am with an organization called Let's Green the Future Trust. We are working mostly on trying to push the sustainable development agenda in Zimbabwe. But we are just a group of young people. It's a youth-led organization with young people with fresh minds. So we are trying to focus on innovative awareness raising in the sustainable development space and pushing all the SDGs in their entirety, but with particular focus on issues to do with renewable energy and climate action. So maybe just to respond to the question posed by Iskia, I think it's quite imperative for us to include civil society in some of the steering committees in the green hydrogen space. Why am I saying so? Because there is this misconception that CSOs are a group of people who specialize in making noise in order to be heard. And I think Gabriel mentioned that CSOs are now inclusive of technical experts as well, who have that capacity to really dissect some of the technical information and demystifying it. So we really need some of those people who can really sit and be at the forefront, because this is a new kid on the block, and there are a lot of perceptions and misconceptions that will be moving around, and a lot of confusion. So we really need to make sure that, and I remember yesterday we were talking about issues to do with social acceptance as well. So in order to achieve that, we need to put the civil society players at the forefront, because they are the ones who will have the best interest of the communities at heart. And the communities will definitely accept some of these technologies because they know that the people who are pushing the mandate are people who have their best interests at heart. And just to add on that one as well, we also have a versatile group, a versatile number of experts in the CSO spectrum. People who are able to push different agendas. So we are quite instrumental when we are put at the forefront, especially in these CM committees.
Absolutely beautiful, and I think that's such a very critical thing that CSOs have so many experts, in the space of civil society and governance. Dr. Amin, can you share some of your perspectives with us as to why you think it's very important having civil society organizations as part of steering committees or governing committees regarding renewable projects? Dr. Amin, are you with us?
I think we need to wait a minute to check.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. You can go answer.
I don't recognize you can see me, but it's not that important for the moment though. So as I was I think I mentioned it, or I highlighted yesterday, that there is this strong idea that we learned a little bit with the a lot of projects in Europe regarding wind energy, regarding renewable energy in general, is that we tend to implement, to think that once we have the acceptance at the global socio-political level, that we can proceed and implement the projects locally without taking into account the community level and the community's acceptance. Now the problem that arises, and without going a little bit again and again what I mentioned yesterday regarding the need of taking communities to in perspective, because it would, I would say, regarding in perspective, the trust and distributive justice and procedural justice. What I want to add is like at the security level. So the main problem is like this kind of foreign investments end up paying, I would say, a premium just to invest in renewable energy because there is a risk of investment. And one of the solutions is to involve local communities, because you are, I would say, securing as well the renewable energy project and the renewable energy investment. And that's still as well in the idea when you look at, for example, the private public cooperation, they are taking account, for example, looking, for example, at hydrogen infrastructure, how to secure hydrogen infrastructure or energy infrastructure in general, involving public localities and the communities in the process can help to secure at this level the investment. And that is one point that I want a little bit to add up to the discussion, that there is beyond what was mentioned, which is I would say like involving sort of have a look at added value, social added value, but like from the investment part as well, that makes sense because that secures the investment as well. And yeah.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Doctor. Now, our next question is the inclusion of civil society organizations, especially at the initial stages of such projects. Tony, speak to us in relation to Hyphen, seeing that Hyphen is at the forefront of implementing the project. How has your involvement of CSOs been, especially at ground level, of course, Kara's region, the question that has been coming back and forth? Speak to us on that.
Thank you, Chair. I think, again, we have to go back to the phase that Hyphen is in. The early consultations that have taken place in relation to the project have been necessary only to facilitate where we are. So until we have mandate and license from government to engage stakeholders, we aren't able to do that, not effectively. So we've had high level with your initial environmental and social impact report. There have been engagements to that extent. The second part is there is an intention to put up net masts and meteorological masts to measure the wind, and then there is engagement as a result of that. But Hyphen at this stage cannot engage in constructive, consultations with different stakeholders until it has mandate to do so. What I would like to share, though, coming back to your first question, how we think we would engage and why civil society participation is important. For me, it's a question around representation. And it's acknowledging that we're trying to do something incredibly difficult that has never been done before. And Hyphen does not have all the answers. And in this context, I'm talking about socio-economic development only, which is my area of the project. Representation means that every civil society organization has a stake in the project when it comes to socio-economic development and the ambit and how we define that. I think most of the organizations that are represented here have a very clear understanding of their role and mandate. As Hyphen, we still need to do the mapping in terms of which of these civil society organizations are some of the key stakeholders when it comes to this project. So that work still has to be done. And on the back of that, we have to work out how we engage. So I think it's important to have that representation, because what the representation does is it brings in the unique perspectives around gender or youth as we're trying to do this difficult thing. And we say, well, we don't know all the answers. How do you help us co-create solutions to the challenges that we face? And that I see as the role of civil society organization. And it's by no means an easy process. It's going to be hell of a challenging, I think, because often our priorities, perhaps in our interests, can be conflicted. But I think it's at the point where those interests and priorities converge, that is the point where we could find the synergies that we need, and we find the innovative solutions that we need to deploy to make a project like this reality.
Absolutely, and we will, I'm sure CSOs based right here in Namibia will hold HYPHEN to account and making sure that HYPHEN includes CSOs, and will be watching the space when it comes to representing the interests of CSOs in our country. So Paula, the next question is for you, ma'am. Of course, corruption is no stranger, or Africa is no stranger when it comes to corruption, often when it comes to such a large-scale projects. What role can civil society organizations play in terms of holding government as well as the private sector accountable in terms of preventing or limiting corruption?
Okay, thank you. Let me first
Maybe you can just push down the microphone a little bit.
Okay. I'm not good in technology. I'm not quite. My name is Sakina, as it was said. And I represent two organizations. The first one is Mujede, but the English speaker always say Mugede. It's Mujede, Mulher Gender Development, Women Gender Development. We're working in the environment and rural community development. But in the environment, we work for environment education only. Environment sanitation, on gender and climate change, then natural resource. But also working for communities, but we focus on rural women. But later on, together with the rural women, we created MMR, Movimento Moçambicano de Mulheres Rurais, which means Mozambican Rural Women's Farmers Movement. So, which is all that organization I implanted in all the country, in 11 provinces. So first, I would like first to thank the organizer for having me here, and also thank the moderator. But before I answer my question, I would like to add something into question.
Just briefly.
The first question I would like, why they involved in the steering committee? Because it's normally in the steering committee, it's where decisions are taken. So the civil society need to be there to influence the decision in favor of their target groups. So if you are there, it's easier for you to influence the decision in benefit of your group. The second question that you said, it was something that I forgot the question, but I think that if they involve the communities, they start early in the beginning, they gain ownership. They look to the project as if they own the project. So it's easier to take responsibility and also to be part in the person of the process. So they own the project right in the beginning. And it's good for us as a civil society, because if we understand very well the project right in the beginning, it's easier to take on to the district, to the women like us who are doing, women and girls and youth in general. So we need to understand it very well, be clear about the project and how it's going to work, be very clear on the process, so it's easier for you to work to take the message to the district. So coming to your question of the corruption. So I think the issue of ownership is very important. We need to work very, very hard to prepare the communities, to prepare to social, we call it social preparation, but my colleague came very well with the issue. We need to set a mechanism of discussion so people know very well. So if we prepare well, we sensitize, we consensitize, we mobilize the communities. They feel they have a sense of the belonging, the ownership. So they will be the one who will be monitoring, to create maintenance of the project. So the issue of the corruption are everywhere. It's even difficult to avoid completely, but it will reduce the level of corruption. If people are involved in the beginning, they have that sense that the project belongs to them also. So that have to see with the beginning, how we really do the inception of the project, of the process. So if